Hello, my name is Houston Johnson. That's Houston like the city, Johnson like the president, and this is our story about where I'm from. Today it's known as Graford, Texas, home of the Graford Jackrabbits, and it's located about an hour west of Fort Worth near beautiful Possum Kingdom Lake. But in 1854 it was part of the Peters Colony and known as the Upper Cross Timbers, but better known as Indian Country. My great-great-great-grandfather, George Rice Beavers, built the home my family and I have lived in for 7 generations. Then it was a 2-room log cabin that overlooked Flat Rock Crossing on Big Keechi Creek. The Fort Worth-Fort Belknap Military Road was cut through the Upper Cross Timbers region of North Texas, and our crossing quickly became known for its water and flat limestone bottom. Wagons traveling the long dusty road would stop at the crossing and soak their wheels in the water to keep the wood tight on the metal. That spot came to be known as the buggy washing hole, but for us growing up in the 70s, it was where we skipped rocks and caught huge catfish. The crossing and our home saw many famous folks during those times. Folks like C.L. Carter, who was the first president of the Stock Raisers Association of Northwest Texas, which later became the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. Carter's signature is seen here in Houston Beavers, that's my namesake by the way, in his brand book dated 1872. A cattle raiser sign still hangs on our gate today. Robert E. Lee visited while traveling to and from Camp Cooper. Oliver Loving, whose home was located nearby, and Charles Goodnight, the 2 characters portrayed in Larry McMurtry's epic western Lonesome Dove, both spent time here. In those days, you weren't so much from a town as much as you were from an area or a territory, and this territory is one of the richest in Texas history. It's been called the cradle of the cattle industry. It's where a great many Texas Indian battles took place. It's where John Graves started his journey in Goodbye to a River, the book about Texas' own river, the Brazos. According to J.H. Baker's diary, in February of 1862, over 200 men, Minutemen or Texas Rangers, from across the territory gathered right here near the house at Flat Rock Crossing and drew lots to see who would stay and defend the Texas frontier under Captain J.J. Curitan and who would go to fight in the war between the states. With all this, you might say I grew up with my pockets full of Texas history, but my life as a young boy wasn't just eating off of a working chuck wagon on the 535,000-acre W.T. Wagner estate near Vernon and playing on the remnants of over 100 years of farming. I was 11 years old in 1976, and Texas was celebrating her bicentennial birthday. My father was the chief of broadcast services at NASA for several years, so as a kid growing up I'd spent lots of time with modern-day pioneers like astronaut Gene Cernan and news icon Walter Cronkite. There were memorable photos, models of Saturn V rockets, planetariums, and stories about Skylab. My father, being part of the Bicentennial Birthday Celebration Committee, had borrowed one of the Apollo moon rocks from NASA to display as part of the bicentennial festivities. In order to get approval from NASA, he had to agree that the rock would be stored in a 5-tumbler vault each evening and kept under armed guard when on display, so he made arrangements with the bank president at City National Bank in Mineral Wells, several miles from our home. In the beginning, going to and from the bank twice a day for the rock was okay, but as time went on, my father decided it would just be easier to hide the rock each evening under my bed in our then 122-year-old home. He thought if someone broke in to steal it, they would never look there. Time came and went, and by the Texas sesquicentennial, I'd joined the Army and left our great state. I think that was when I realized what it was really like to be a Texan. It's hard to describe the sense of belonging to something bigger, something of legend and lore, when you didn't play a role in it. The questions people ask about their impressions of Texas, I realized I'd grown up a part of something of historical proportions, and I was part of a persona even though I hadn't done anything except take it for granted. It was odd being, as Oliver Loving on his deathbed said to Charles Goodnight, in a foreign country, that would be anywhere outside the state of Texas, where everyone knew a story or a joke about Texans, but only the Texans around you knew what an Aggie joke was. I'm older now, and my mama and papa have raised a good Texas boy who gets a tear in his eye when he hears the national anthem and loves God and the country his state is now a part of. I have a much deeper understanding of my family history and what it's like to be from a state that was once its own country. I think back about those pioneers and the early day settlers, and I look at what characteristics they must have embodied and displayed that created Texans. The desire to do something others feared, the need to fight for what they believed in, the courage to do what needed to be done, wanting to be part of something unique and bigger, style, passion, independence, patriotism, and doing what others said couldn't be done. I realized one day that those were the same characteristics in the stories I'd been told about the early days of space exploration, and two things dawned on me. One, that just must be the reason why NASA is in Houston, Texas. And two, the 122-year-old log cabin that was my home and the Apollo moon rock hidden under my bed were both the end result of pioneers, settlers, and explorers displaying the same characteristics that described what it's like to be a Texan. And that rock, being in our home, was the coming together of generations, history, accomplishment, and technology in a way that could only be told by a Texan. When Oliver Loving's body was being brought back to his home in Palapena County for burial, the famous cattleman crossed our crossing one last time. The Masons would later write that when he finally arrived home, the box his body was in was too large to get through the door, so they put him back on the wagon and took him to Weatherford, where he was later buried. I feel a little bit like that at times. I want to get back home, but for some reason or another, I just can't get through that door. My father is much older and still lives on the crossing, and my desire to learn more about the history of this great state and our family brings sadness to my heart because I know his time on earth is limited, and I don't feel prepared to take the torch. Our home that was built when Dallas was no more than a few log cabins is now one of the oldest homes in the state and a recognized Texas historical landmark. And much like the space program, and ironically some of the moon rocks, the history is fading or missing. Where I'm from has been the backdrop for Western movies and programs, and there are still notable Texans who've claimed Graford as their home. Army General Bill Garrison from the movie Black Hawk Down, college basketball coach Billy Clyde Gillespie, my cousin Steve Mitchell, a proud member of the Gene Autry Hall of Fame, who's singing in the background of this movie, and one of the greatest Western artists of all time, Chuck Dehon, who's used this same history as the inspiration for many of his paintings. The elders who passed the stories down through the generations have gone to be with our forefathers, but those of us left behind are a generation who don't care as much or who've realized, possibly too late as I have, that carrying on these traditions and this thing we call Texan has to be done. That is why I've shared our story. It's my call to other Texans to learn the part they play in Texas history and keep it alive.
Howdy folks. Our forefathers came to this wonderful state of Texas in the early 1850s when the frontier was truly young. They settled here and established a pioneer legacy whose spirit lives on in our everyday lives. We look forward to the future because of the past. They laid a foundation built on faith and trust in God, a rich genealogy that Houston and I cherish, which we all have. Stay in the saddle.